Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Chris Ellis, and I've been at Cascadeo since day one when we started as a fully virtual company. As we've grown, we've added many members throughout the world. The home and work setup has changed rapidly over the last few months. Personally, there are 5 people in our house all trying to get stuff done online. We have 3 kids adapting to doing school online using an alphabet soup of SaaS tools, all while my wife and I have been lucky enough to continue working. Needless to say, it's been a challenge. I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Jared Reimer, the CEO of Cascadeo, who will be sharing with you everything that we've learned over Cascadeo's 13 years in business with a distributed workforce. Jared?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us, and hopefully we'll be able to share some useful real-world experiences, some hard-won victories, some failures, and a lot of insight about what works and what doesn't. So first, I changed the title of this a little bit to Distributed Operations, the New Business as Usual, because I think we should all assume that even after the COVID crisis passes someday, that these new tools, cultures, customs, those are going to persist forever. So I don't think we should assume this is a short-term change. I think this is a permanent transformation. Okay, so this is funny because I think everyone talks about DRBC and planning for catastrophes and what if the building burns down, what if there's a fire, a flood, an earthquake, nuclear event, whatever. I don't think this was really well anticipated, except among the epidemiologists and specialists in the field. It's clear that the intelligence community was ringing alarm bells, and no one really listened to them. So here we are. I think at this point it's clear people, at least some significant number, myself included, even after this passes, I'm not going back to the mall. Retail, I don't see myself going back to retail. Everything now can be done online, can be done through delivery. So our fundamental assumptions about how we go about our lives, both professionally and personally, I think are forever altered by this. There will be people that will go back to the movie theaters. There will be people that go back out to restaurants, but probably not in the numbers that they did before. Even if they feel like the risk of infection is low, I think that in the end, consumer behavior is governed by convenience to a large degree, and it's simply better to not have to go wait in queue at the grocery store or go to the mall to buy some physical item when you can get the thing better, faster, and cheaper on the internet. So, this is a scenario that no one really anticipated, but it was inevitable because things were already trending in this direction. What it did was it forced everyone over the wall all at once. So Cascadeo has been using tools like Zoom and GoToMeeting and Google Hangouts for years, but now 100% of our meetings are through Zoom and Google Hangout and GoToMeeting, because all of our customers, all of our suppliers, all of our team members, we're all on these same tools. Obviously, some companies have had to resort to drastic measures, and that's really, really unfortunate. Our best wishes to them. I hope that the second round stimulus stuff goes through and that we can avoid further job losses. I applaud the companies that have been able to retool around new opportunities. In the case of Cascadeo, we haven't historically done a huge amount of end user compute business and cloud VDI business, but you can bet there's a lot more demand for that than there was 90 days ago. So you roll with the punches and you keep finding ways to help people, because at the end of the day, if you're in the business of helping people, that's probably better than being in the business of operating a retail storefront right now. We were really lucky and probably unusual in the sense that we had set up from day one to run in a distributed asynchronous virtual fashion. We didn't make a big adjustment because we were already doing these things internally. It wasn't a change for us. It was more of a business as usual. The whole world has changed around telework. Obviously, this has implications beyond just technology. So a lot of teams are used to physical meetings. They're used to a lot of real-time synchronous communications. They're not used to asynchronous, like starts and stops in dialogue and projects and communications. They're not used to working through chat instead of long, emails with 50 people CC'd on them. I think a lot of companies are really worried about security, compliance, governance. there's a legitimate concern there, but I think the risk there is a lot less than it used to be, especially if you're using SaaS, where the tools are basically the same, whether you're working from home or from an office environment. I think a lot of companies have pulled back on their investment in things that they view as not critical to their business operations. And per the Goldman and Sequoia stuff, we think that's probably a mistake, especially if you're cutting R&D and investment in your next generation products and services, because you don't want to be left with nothing new to sell when the recovery comes. So our company, for example, is telling anyone who's between client projects to go either work on their training and certs or build our product. And we think that's a wise strategy. And the Sequoia folks are basically saying to their portfolio companies, continue to invest in R&D. There's a lot of challenges for management and leadership for this. So not all employees are ready for it or comfortable with it. Even within our company, we've had a hard time getting everyone to opt in to using video calls. Some people just feel very weird and awkward about that, and it requires sustained encouragement and gentle pressure to get people to adapt to the new reality. You can't get everyone to do it, but it does help. I think Zoom and video calls make a big difference. So we really try to encourage that type of face-to-face collaboration. I think the harder one is getting people used to a different form of asynchronous work and collaboration, where person A might go make an edit, person B might come in after them and make an edit, and B and C might be working concurrently, and A might get a notification that something changed. Contrast that to, hey, Bob, here's the latest version of the slide deck. I'm just emailing it to you. Go ahead and make your edits and then email it back to me. Don't do that. If you're still doing that, trust me, there's a better way. But you need to help teach people, and you need to have leadership that supports that and mandates that style of work, because if you don't require it, you end up with an even worse scenario, which is that you have some people doing it one way and others doing it another, and you get kind of the worst of both worlds and a lot of chaos. So it needs to come from leadership, and the ways that leaders manage need to evolve with the times. So here's one of the hardest things, okay? If you are used to a conventional workplace, if you're used to an office environment and physical meetings, if you're used to that, it can be very, very hard when you suddenly lose that to maintain your team cohesion, the trust, the camaraderie, the banter. And so you have to kind of force it. And that's a tricky thing. It's not easy to do this, but we make a point of trying to get as many people in our company as possible, not just to contribute, we use Slack, by the way, to work chat, but to share funny things, share interesting information from their communities, to share birthdays and anniversaries and kid pictures. It seems kind of corny, but there's a reason for this, right? It helps you remember and stay connected to the people that you no longer get to see every day around the water cooler. And it's true, right? The water cooler is a distraction, but it also it serves a purpose, right? It serves this bonding and cohesion purpose that is very difficult to recreate in the asynchronous online world. It's not impossible. Like when I watch my kids playing Fortnite with their friends and relatives, they're doing a form of real-time collaboration, strategy, execution, a form of work, really. But that's the exception and not the norm, because they all make a point of getting into the Fortnite world and working together at a specific time. I think the more practical implementation is less synchronous, less real-time, more of a, you work when and where you have the time and the headspace, and your coworkers pick it up and work with it as the next step. There will always be need for real-time collaboration, like in an emergency, for critical operational tasks like systems maintenance or whatever. But a lot of the work that we do, like knowledge work, doesn't have to be done at a fixed time every day. It can be done as the work comes up, kind of an event-driven, or it can be done as people have cycles to contribute, like building a slide deck for this presentation. This one's a tough one, okay? Building a distributed team and managing a distributed team is really hard if you're not used to doing it. And maintaining cohesion, not having people retreat into territorial behaviors or backstabbing or throwing people under the bus. Very, very important, right? One of the key takeaways here, you need to have a company mandate from the top down that this is the way we work now, and you need to enforce that, okay? So you cannot say, well, some of you are going to do it one way, the other ones can do it another way. You do it however you want. Some people use PowerPoint, some people use G Suite, some people, write with a pen and paper on a pad and take pictures. That doesn't work, right? There need to be clear policies around working asynchronously and how we collaborate, how we store data. These tools also serve another purpose. So aside from distributed work and responsibility, they also give you telemetry into who's producing, who's working, what they're working on, what their contributions are. For example, if I edit this slide deck, that leaves a paper trail that I can come back and follow later and see that I actually was participating. And if there's a problem, like something gets broken, it makes it much easier to backtrace where the problem occurred. Hypercommunication is really important. We do weekly one-to-ones between leadership and direct reports. We do many-to-ones. These can be all hands or departmental. We really push for transparency. We really try to get people to document their work in Slack, to announce things rather than wait to be asked. That can be uncomfortable, right? Not everyone's comfortable saying, look at me, look what I did, look at this thing I just accomplished, but no one will know if you don't tell them, right? If you're waiting for someone to ask, you're probably doing it wrong. I think another thing that's key is to build trust amongst your teammates. There needs to be mutual accountability. And one great thing about these tools is that comes implicitly if you use them correctly. For example, if you have a daily stand-up meeting in Slack, there's a perfectly visible, transparent paper trail. Here's what I worked on yesterday, here's what I'm doing today, and here's what's holding me back or blocking me. No one can say, well, I don't know what Jared's working on today, because I am obligated and expected to be transparent about that. And by that, I am holding myself accountable and setting it up so that my coworkers can hold me accountable. Finally, the exaggerated lean in is really important. So again, even though it can be awkward, I'm really trying to get our folks to do video calls face-to-face every single week just to make sure, are you okay? Do you have concerns? Is there something the company can do to help you? Are you missing a tool? Do you have feedback on how things are going? And in the past, I think a lot of that happened in the halls at the office, like, hey, how's it going? It's going great. Nowadays we have to be a lot more deliberate about it. So within our leadership team, we do one-on-ones every week with each of the leadership team members and myself. And I think that's important. So this is a great Medium blog post. I think this guy is the WordPress founder or something. And he lays out the 5 levels of remote work. And notice that the 4th level, the one just before you get to Nirvana, is asynchronous operations and communications. In particular, Slack, Teams, HipChat, those types of tools are critical to breaking out of the email loop, the reply all, the forwarding of, this version, don't use that version, use the new version. All of that nonsense has to stop, right? That is just destructive and wasteful. If you're not using these tools today, my #1 highest recommendation out of all of this would be pick one of the best like calendaring and email systems, O365, G Suite, Amazon has WorkDocs, whatever. Pick one and fully adopt it and embrace it. And in parallel, Teams, Slack, any of those real-time asynchronous communications tools, for those of us that are a little older, think back to IRC and chat on bulletin boards if you're really old. That is the right way to operate in a distributed fashion. If you're setting fixed meetings like, okay, team, we're all going to meet at 9:15 to go work on that document, as if we were going to get in a conference room together, you're forcing people to schedule their whole days and their whole lives around a fixed start and stop time that may or may not work for them. It may or may not work with the fact that they've got kids at home who are homeschooling. Why would you do that, right? That just throws everything off kilter. Now, there are always going to be critical decisions and critical meetings where you need everyone together, and the Zoom Brady Bunch, everyone can see each other. It's invaluable for that kind of a thing. but not every meeting is a board meeting. Not every meeting is a critical decision point where you need real-time debate and discussion. If it's a working session, if it's a let's go build the slide deck for our webinar, that should be done asynchronously. And if you're setting fixed meetings to do it, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay? So if you have time, I would Google this specifically and read it because I think they do a beautiful job at kind of helping you see the journey from the old way of working to the way that the highest performing distributed companies operate. And Automatic, the WordPress guys, absolutely would be one of those. They've built a huge multi-billion-dollar business entirely virtually. I don't think they even have a physical office. So there's a few others out there that have done this, by the way. They're not alone. This is the meat of it. How does Cascadeo actually do it? And I promise to be transparent, so I'm going to be transparent and share with you the exact tools, technologies, tricks we use to make it work. Right now, we have employees in North America and the United States. We have some team members who are contractors in Canada. We have most of our employees in the Philippines. So a lot of our delivery and fulfillment capability for PS and managed services is in the Philippines. We have vendor companies that we use for some of our projects, like specialists. So how do we do it? First, as I mentioned, Slack in our mind is the central nervous system. Everything has to go in and out of Slack. All the other SaaS services, tools, people, we require that that be the nexus of all that information exchange. We discourage out-of-band communications like text messaging, WhatsApp, email. We try to banish internal email, meaning if you're only emailing a coworker, you should go use Slack instead. No one needs another email in their inbox. We try to discourage one-to-one chat and encourage and promote team chat. Like, for example, if we have a channel dedicated to a specific project, we would rather have the engineers and the engagement managers collaborating there than on a sideline communication where no one else can see what they're working on or what decisions were made. It still happens, and there are, of course, legitimate cases where a one-to-one communication is more appropriate, but we generally try to default to being transparent and a broader audience rather than being secretive and, you know, A tells B, B tells C, because by the time it gets to Z, you guys all remember the telephone game, the message has changed. So another thing Cascadeo believes, IaaS, meaning virtual machines, servers, IaaS is a 4-letter word. We don't want to run servers unless we absolutely have to. There are times when you don't have a choice. That's probably the only time that you should be running VMs at this point. If you have servers that are critical to your business, you should rethink that, because there's probably a better SaaS answer. And if there's not, there's probably a better hosted or managed answer. So don't waste your time on IT stuff. You know, spend as little headspace as you have to. Pay the experts to run these things. The people who write the software, they're going to do a better job 9 times out of 10 than we ourselves would do. The digital breadcrumbs are important. So because we have a harder time measuring performance in a distributed workforce, we make a point of tracking code commits, Slack participation, email activity, time logs, ticket activity, because we need a way to objectively confirm that people are showing up and working and that they're doing good work consistently. And when they want a performance review and a pay raise, we have some data to work with instead of just guessing. Now, that does not eliminate the need for some subjective analysis from a manager, from a customer, from their participation in optional initiatives. Like, we didn't make one person build this slide deck. In our marketing channel, I said, hey guys, I need help. We got this webinar coming up. I need contributions. I need feedback. Even if you only have 5 minutes, your input matters. And I got like 10 people to come and help me out, right? Now, no one was specifically ordered to do it, but I remember and I notice who always shows up, who always puts in that little extra effort, who always makes the time. And I'll remember that when it comes time to do performance reviews, because there is a subjective aspect to it. It's not purely data and breadcrumbs and numbers. We have the question of who's watching the watchers, meaning how do we know that the people who are in charge with 24/7 operations are actually at the console alive, well, functioning, didn't lose their connection. So we use tools like Dead Man Snitch to confirm affirmatively that people are present and are showing up and that systems are working correctly. This is a subtle thing, but a lot of companies assume that things are working until something is proven to be broken or someone reports it. And if they have a monitoring system, there's nobody monitoring that. Meaning if the monitoring system fails silently, no one knows. One company actually told us, the way that we know that our monitoring system is broken is because we stop getting emails from it. This is not good, right? So you need somebody that watches the watchers. That's a monitor of the monitoring tools. And then you need monitoring tools that verify proactively that your infrastructure is working correctly. One big benefit is that because our team is globally distributed, we don't have a single site failure risk, meaning if we lost our Seattle office or we lost our Quezon City, Manila office, the company would keep going. In fact, we effectively have, right? On zero notice or near zero notice, we made the decision before the government made us to shut down both of the offices. And that decision, from the point at which we talked about it to when we made the call to when we flipped the switch and announced it and went virtual, that happened in under a day. There was no 2-week planning period to get ready to go virtual. We just said, we can't have our team get sick. This isn't worth the risk. We know how to do this. Let's just go ahead and flip the switch. And at the time, it felt a bit drastic and maybe like an overreaction, but in hindsight, it was entirely the correct response. That was an easy decision for us, or easier than it would have been, because we already had all the tooling in place. The tools we use are many. SaaS sprawl is a big problem, but I'm going to share the ones that I think are most important. First, I'll give you a rule. Right now, if you want a new SaaS tool of any kind, you have to fill out a form that proves that you've done your due diligence and you know what you're buying, what the security implications are, et cetera. And there's an informal rule that says if you're going to add a new SaaS vendor, you have to find 2 old ones to get rid of, because most companies have 5 different Dropbox, Box.net, Google Drive, OneDrive. They have 5 different video conferencing tools, Zoom and Hangouts and GoToMeeting and WebEx. You got to keep pruning the tree back. It's a never-ending, thankless job, but you can't let that get out of control. And it's not just because of the cost. It's because your data governance, your ability to secure the data and know where it is diminished every time you add another vendor. So Zoom, I think, is the best video conferencing and collaboration platform these days. They've had some bad press about some security issues. They've responded competently to those. They've been transparent. It's no better or worse, in my opinion, than any other big tech company's security track record. They're just getting singled out because they got big fast. So we're big fans of Zoom, and in particular, the Brady Bunch multi-video discussions for critical decision making. I think that's really important. Trello is a wonderful tool for tracking projects. So for example, when we take on a client project, we'll usually use Trello, sometimes Jira if the client prefers it, but Trello is a wonderful tool for distributed project and task management. We use Google G Suite, as I mentioned. Harvest we use for tracking time. So if you are a professional services engineer, you are required to provide records of what you worked on for which client, how long it took, in part because we use that to bill customers, but also because it's your proof of work. It's when someone says, well, what have you been doing all quarter? You can say, well, let's pull up my harvest log and talk about it, right? It's for the benefit of the customer, the manager, and the employee to have a durable record that is built as the work is performed. So even though it's a little bit tedious, we really are big on Harvest as a time tracking tool. Zendesk is a ticketing system, like an IT help desk ticketing system. So we provide managed services. We find that tickets are a great way to keep all of those things straight. They also, again, provide a durable paper trail of who did what when. They can be client facing. You can have internal notes. That way, when engineer number 32 works on a client, they have all the history of that incident right at their fingertips. They don't have to ask to be brought up to speed. Zapier is a cool tool that not many people know about. It lets you orchestrate workflows across SaaS services. So for example, when some event happens, take some action, like someone tweets about my company, I want you to post it to Slack, or I want you to make a ticket for them, or whatever workflow you would have. Zapier can help orchestrate that in an automated and scalable fashion. And then we use HubSpot for our email and marketing communications, like the one that you probably received that told you we were doing this webinar. So how do you measure performance? Number one for us is the business outcome. Is the customer happy? Are they renewing or extending their contract? Are they referring us to their friends? Are they sending us positive feedback? Are they paying their bills? Business outcomes ahead of all else, right? And you've heard maybe of the results-oriented work environment, ROWE. I really believe in that. Smart people don't always work the same way as the next smart person, but the outcomes should be the proof is in the pudding, right? So what are the outcomes that you're delivering? And if you can't point to specific customer and business outcomes, you're probably doing it wrong. So to us, the key tell usually is, what is the level of client satisfaction as reported by the client, and are they continuing on with more work, or at least willing to be referenceable if the project is done and they no longer need our services, right? Observability and measurement is a big deal. I don't like the big brother stuff. Some companies are taking webcam screenshots and stuff of their employees. I think that's a bit much. If you don't trust your employees to be honest and honorable, maybe you have a bigger problem, but you do need a way to objectively measure. So we're big on breadcrumbs left by activities in SaaS applications. Obviously, revenues, closed deals, our go-to-market partners, those are all really important, and those are all kind of business outcome oriented. Net Promoter Score, for those who are not familiar, is the simple question: would you recommend Cascadeo to your friends and family? Yes or no? If the answer is no, that's bad. If the answer is good, obviously that's a positive thing. You want to keep constantly testing that question, right? Are our customers referenceable? Because if they're not, you need to course correct early and maybe go back and make it right. Don't let that number sag. And then finally, it's not just about keeping the customers, right? Keeping our employees is really, really important, because in our case, they are the bread and butter of the company, right? They are the people that make the thing go, the spark plug. And I think that's true for most companies, but especially in technical jobs, finding pro architect certified engineers is very hard. Attracting them and recruiting them and onboarding them, you want to keep those people. And so it's just as important that you track employee retention as it is that you track client retention, because you have to manage both sides of that equation to have a healthy business. I've often heard well, I couldn't do it because I didn't have access. I lost my internet connection, my cable modem went down, whatever. And to this, I'm simply going to call bullshit, because in this day and age, there is no excuse whatsoever for not having access unless you are in a concrete bunker 10 feet underground. So many of us date back to the pre-dial-up internet eras with bulletin boards. There was email back then. Many of us went through the early fumbling with Trumpet, Winsock, and dial-up and stuff in PPP. We had email, we had chat back then. When cellular first came out, it was clunky and slow and awkward with GPRS. It still worked. You could still do email from your Motorola flip phone on your 1X, network back in the day. And then the miracle happened, okay? And the miracle was we got meaningful bandwidth. Edge wasn't really meaningful. This was like 2G cellular GSM. But when we got to 3G, when we got to the iPhone, everything changed. Previously, people thought I was like clever because I could work from anywhere, even if it was slow and clunky. Instantly, everyone could work from everywhere, and there was no longer any freedom from email and notifications and whatever else. We're not going back, right? Unless you make an explicit lifestyle decision to go backwards. The iPhone and that technology is here to stay. Nowadays, we have LTE, which is fantastic. You can make it even better using amplifiers and antennas. They call them boosters. I have these for camping, for example. So I have an LTE antenna and an amplifier. I also have a LTE hotspot modem that's purpose-built for business use, that has a much better radio than the hotspot built into your iPhone does. 5G is getting deployed. Our partners at Globe Telecom are the first, I think, in Asia to deploy 5G commercially. It's coming here too. 5G is going to be like having fiber to your phone, except wirelessly. So you should just assume that within a year or so, your next iPhone or Samsung phone will have equivalent network connectivity to your office or your home. And then as a last resort, there's really amazing satellite technology that is expensive, but not prohibitively so, especially if you use it correctly. Iridium has been around for many years. It's low bandwidth, mostly used for voice and text messaging, can be used for email and other light data. There's a Garmin product called InReach. That's a fantastic two-way satellite communicator. I think it costs $15 a month for the service on it. I use this for camping. I like to spend a lot of time skiing and camping in the months that allow that in Seattle. These tools are out there today. We've also experimented with Inmarsat BGAN, which is high bitrate broadband. And this is very expensive on a per megabyte basis, but very cheap when you consider that you could be literally out in the middle of the ocean on an oil rig or on a boat or on a remote island and still get a megabit or more of sustained internet bandwidth with latency low enough that you can do things like voice and video calling. So if you have the budget and the need, there are technologies, like for example, when you see the CNN embedded reporter, in the middle of like a war zone, this is the technology they use to do video conferencing over satellite, or at least some of them do. So these technologies, commercially available, ready to go. You can rent the equipment. You don't have to buy it. So the kit is probably $2,000, but you can rent it for $100 a week or something from these satellite outfitters. No excuses, guys. If you need to get the work done, the tools do exist. And then, of course, cable modems and fiber are fantastic if you can get them. There's also Wi-Fi at Starbucks and McDonald's and everywhere else. There's Wi-Fi in the airplanes. So anyone who tells you, I can't do my job because I can't get online, I don't have access, either they are not trying hard enough or you are not equipping them with the right tools and technologies they need to be productive. But those tools and technologies absolutely exist. I have used every single product on this list, except 5G. I haven't got to try 5G yet, but every other product on this list, you can do it. It's not rocket science. Satellite communications included. It's not rocket science. Okay, security, auditability, observability, and trust. So you need to be able to remotely manage and wipe devices if they contain secure data. If you're smart, you ban that entirely and you say, you may not cache sensitive data on your phone, your workstation. Instead, all of that sensitive data lives in the cloud, in the company's IT systems. The company will accept responsibility for its security if you put the data in the cloud. But if you do something silly, like putting sticky notes with your passwords on your desktop and your desktop gets compromised, that's on you. So there's an accountability thing here. There's a carrot and a stick. The carrot is, if you follow the rules and do the right things, the company will take responsibility for InfoSec. If you do the wrong things, you will be held accountable. And that's not just a training thing, there's an enforcement aspect. Everyone in our company knows if you break client confidentiality, you're going to get fired. And we make them sign a document stating, I understand the IT policies. I understand that I cannot store sensitive data on my personal computer. I understand that I will be terminated if I break these policies, because this is one of those crimes that you can't just let it slip, right? So if everyone has signed a document saying, I know the rules and I'm going to abide by them, no one has an excuse when the security breach happens on their watch. Finally, I think it's really important to have some kind of central logging and analytics, and we see a lot of companies do a really poor job at this. So I would, if you haven't already invested in Splunk, Papertrail, Loggly, I don't know, turn on all of the logging functions in the AWS console. You're losing data. It's a form of data loss if you're not collecting these logs, but it's not enough to just collect them. You need to aggregate them into some central system for log analysis, correlation. And if you're not doing that, I think that's a must-have. That's a must-do, regardless of whether you plan to have a virtual workforce or not. And very few companies get this right. Tech companies tend to get it right, but we've looked behind the curtains at a lot of non-tech companies, and it's very often an area of tremendous exposure and risk, and it's completely preventable. So this is the big question. Do you really need a server or a desktop? I would argue no. Servers are a ticking time bomb. Desktop computers and laptops are another ticking time bomb. What if you just said, no, we're not going to do that anymore? Like, yes, I own a laptop computer, but it's used to access systems across the internet. It's not where the actual application execution occurs. Similarly, the data stores are all in the cloud. The servers have been replaced with SaaS services, meaning I don't run a bunch of VMs and EC2 servers and applications on them. We don't run Exchange, we use G Suite, right? So what if the world has simply moved on and you're wasting your time and energy making buggy whips when everybody else is sort of past that phase? You can do it, but why would you do that, right? So there are a few cases like legacy applications where you probably can't get away from running a server. There are good options like containerization that you might explore for mitigating some of that risk. But if your business model involves VMware and lots of VMs and VM snapshotting and pushing new desktop images out to fleets of company-owned laptops, you're doing it wrong. That era is over, and only in very high compliance environments is there any real justification in my mind for that kind of IT. This is our usual workflow for any kind of cloud project, but it applies perfectly to work remote projects. So first, you need to do some discovery, and ideally, you'll have an expert, doesn't have to be us, help you with that discovery because you may not know what to look for. So it's not just what do you have, it's where are you going, what are your regulatory and business constraints, what tools do you have that are working, what tools exist out there that you don't know about. The assessment piece also, you kind of want a subject matter expert to come in there and say, I've seen 100 of these before. I automatically know what to look for, and I don't even have to think about it, right? I just can look at the list and say, oh, that's not good. I've seen this go wrong too many times. So assessing the results of your discovery is a big deal. The roadmap is also a big deal. You should identify milestones and say, what are the big major milestones? Like everything is in SaaS, or we're going to deprecate our physical servers, or we're going to enable 100% of our workers to access our systems from home. You define them, and then you work backwards from there. You build your tactical execution plans against those strategic milestones. When you do your design, again, I recommend having somebody who's done it before, but if you do it, start with governance, like have centralized authentication and logging. How do you put guardrails up so people can't do reckless and stupid things? How do you minimize the amount of infrastructure that you're managing in favor of managing vendors and SaaS services? The implementation piece is hard because a lot of companies that are not tech companies have not really embraced iterative development and operations. This is the future of work, not just for tech. If you haven't already gone to school in a big way around agile methodology, that's very important, not just for work from home, but for everything. Data first in your operations, monitor everything, log everything, plumb all of that data into one common platform. Don't have a bunch of islands of telemetry. That never works in practice. If you're writing your system logs to the local disk of the server, you're doing it wrong. And then finally, you got to continuously validate that you're actually capable of deploying by doing it. So ideally, you use CloudFormation or Terraform or whatever. You repeatedly exercise that deployment, and by doing so, you prove over and over again that you actually have a functioning DRBC strategy, but you get a lot more than that out of the exercise. So that too is part of kind of the broader body of work around agile development and continuous delivery. At this point, we got a few minutes left for Q&A. If we run out of time, you can send Q&A after the fact. Tammy will be available if you guys want to have follow-on conversations. We will always make the time to help you with any of this stuff. So please let us know if you have any additional questions. And with that, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So, Mr. Ellis, do you have some for us?
Yeah, we got a few coming in.
Sure.
Let's see here. Do you think that VPN is needed to encrypt data in and out of a workstation or laptop or desktop?
Only if you're doing it wrong, right? If you have like fat client binaries running on your laptop that talk to a server that is in private address space, then technically, yes, I guess you do. Although there are products like Zscaler that can help make that less onerous. But why are you doing that? Like if I had that problem, I would say, let's use something like AWS Workspaces or some VDI solution, run the application in the cloud, and have the home worker connect to that virtual desktop. You can also look at things like AppStream that will stream applications over a web browser. So in essence, SSL and HTTPS is the VPN you should be using for most things. If you're doing a dial-on-demand, old-school IPsec VPN, you're probably doing. All right, we're out of time, guys. Thank you all for attending, and hope to hear from you soon. Stay safe, be well. Thanks, take care.